Welcome, everybody. How's the day going for all of you?
Great.
Exciting?
Yes.
Energy? Did we drink enough coffee? Are we good? Okay, I'm particularly honored to be facilitating this panel. My name is FLEUR. They tell me I'm one of the deputy mayors of Jerusalem. And I'm extremely excited because this particular subject is very close to our hearts here in Jerusalem. I'll tell you a little bit of our story and why this is so relevant. Jerusalem 7 years ago was a bit of a backwater town in terms of innovation. It wasn't really part of the startup nation as we know it. And there was JVP, which is one of the main investment funds in the country, and they have they had a very successful incubator, but this was an oasis in the middle of a desert. There was very little going on in Jerusalem, and something started to change. And I want to say a few things about the change, and what I really want to do today with our fascinating panelists is to try and see whether we can crack what is the secret sauce of a successful innovation ecosystem. Is there such a thing? Is it regionally? Does it change? And what the trends are, and how it is that we can move different cities towards that. But in Jerusalem, the story was very interesting because it started from the ground up. It didn't start from the bottom down. About 7 years ago, I have my own company. I'm a communications consultant. I help startups with their pitches, with their messaging, with their value proposition. And I got called in by some students from Hebrew University in Jerusalem. They had this crazy idea. They wanted to set up an accelerator. You have to understand, no accelerator is nothing in Jerusalem. So 7 years ago, I get a call. They invite me to see whether I'm going to be the person teaching these startups how to pitch. And I was very excited. This was, I was going to get this gig or not. But what happened was that this small accelerator from Hebrew University, which was funded by the Students' Union of the Hebrew University, created something that hadn't been in Jerusalem before. It created the start of a movement towards being part of the startup nation and towards developing a startup ecosystem in the city. All the graduates from that accelerator, none of them have a startup that worked, but they all became ambassadors of this amazing ecosystem. Today, we have 5 accelerators in the city. After this was a ground movement, I'm very happy that the JDA, which I'm now very pleased to be a board member of, the Jerusalem Development Authority, started funding accelerators, started funding different events in the city, started bringing funding to Jerusalem. And Jerusalem today, we still have a long way to go, but Jerusalem today is an example of a success story that in a short amount of time, we managed to be on the map. It's one now. It's been, by the TechCrunch said that we're one of the top 10 growing tech hubs in the world, and we're just beginning. So I'm very excited to have this discussion, also with our panelists, but also with you. I want to invite on stage FRANCESCA Warner. FRANCESCA, or Czech as her friends call her, I'm going to take that liberty now, is the CEO of Diversity VC. It's an amazing VC that actually is there to encourage diversity in funding and in investment in the UK. And I've got a feeling that FRANCESCA somehow is going to take over the world with this. So thank you, FRANCESCA. Please come on stage. My second panelist, GYOUNG, LAILA, I have something in common with her. We're both Spanish speakers. She lived in Argentina for a long time. She's an investment officer at the IDB Lab, the Inter-American Development Bank, LATAM Focus, venture capital funds. We're very, very pleased to have her say she's really somebody who is taking this Inter-America thing to a completely new level. So please welcome us, join us on stage. DILEK DAYINLARLI, founder of ScaleX Ventures, early stage venture capital, voted one of the most successful women leaders in impact, originally is in Turkey and doing a lot, therefore, for the region as well. So we'd love to invite DILEK to come on stage as well. Now, we did invite a couple of men, just to make sure that there was gender equality in this. 1 second. Let me just invite a wonderful woman. DEBJANI Josh. She is the 5th president of NASSCOM. NASSCOM is the National Association of Software and Service Companies. She was voted one of the most influential women, recognized by the president of India. She is a veteran in this industry and is basically changing entire regions in India. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we'll let the men up. David Matayan. David Matayan is from originally, are you originally from Nairobi? Where's David? Okay, 15 years veteran in investment banking in Nairobi. He's the author of Africa Rising, knows about all the investment opportunities, and good for our crowd. He has now been announced as the director of Africa for our crowd. So David, please welcome us on stage. And last but certainly not least, and I guess I put him last because we're friends and I don't want people to think there's any favoritism going on here, Chaim Motzin. Chaim I've met many years ago when he was one of the co-founders of Gigawatt Global Solar Energy in Africa. Today he's the founder of Izuba, bringing sustainable energy solutions to many, many regions in Africa. Chaim, please join us on stage. All right. If you want to say something about yourselves that I didn't say, please go ahead. I want to start with the first question. Is there a secret sauce to developing an innovation ecosystem, whether regionally or in a city or just in a particular subject in general? Would you say there's a secret sauce? And if so, what do you think that sauce is?
Big question. Yeah, thank you so much, Fleur, for that amazing introduction and for having me here. I obviously am here talking about diversity and inclusion. I think that is a massive part of actually building an amazing entrepreneurial ecosystem and actually being open-minded and being creative. But I also think that communities are a huge part. So you talked about these students kind of coming together from the bottom up, and I think that's absolutely crucial. It is kind of impossible to identify what makes a community so strong, but I think that there are things that you can do to encourage them. Funding, spaces they can meet, communication between them, that sort of general attitude which I've picked up a lot in Israel, which is about collaboration and can we do something together, can we cooperate? I'm going to take a lot of that back to the UK with me, along with the female entrepreneurs in this room, I think.
What about you, Dilek?
Just a small addition to your opening. Thank you so much, by the way.
Sorry, please add anything I missed out. Okay?
No. I'm really passionate about ecosystems, actually. And I'm a guest lecturer at Stanford talking about emerging ecosystems. And we have done a deep research for ourselves to understand what makes those successful ecosystems successful. And we realized every ecosystem has their own special thing, but you have to have some stuff. Like they usually have their strengths, like culture, market access, or talent, money, or policy. But usually, like US, which is contradicting to all people, it's been funded or designed by US government at the beginning, but it picked up with an amazing talent pool next to Stanford, Berkeley. But when you come to Israel, it's also like a lot of amazing programs like Yozmas and other things and connecting to the world. But what I see lately is like Nordic countries coming out of Europe. They were small countries and they had to sold outside of their markets, let's say, and they created amazing success stories. So I think special sauce requires so little details specific to their own market. But I see an inflection point everywhere, which was fascinating for me. Whenever there's a success story, it changes everything. Yeah. So even in New York, actually, when I went there first time, they didn't have the double-click exit. But right after, I mean, not right after, but couple years after double-click exit, you see it's blooming. Because we say spillover, which is like people who made money, who saw that story, now went out, funded other companies or founded their own companies. It's the same in Chicago with Groupon. Here, it's Waze and Mobileye. I mean, if you talk to entrepreneurs here, they will say it wasn't like this before. So I think we need to focus to make that success stories as soon as possible. So that will change a lot.
Thank you. It's almost like it's a spillover.
Yes, spillover.
It's catching. Success can be catching.
Infectious.
Infectious. What about you? What have you seen in your own region? What are the trends? How are you, as a government body, encouraging and growing?
We are an industry body, not a government body.
An industry body. How are you seeing that growth?
Yeah. Before I answer that, I think the secret sauce, because that's something I'm passionate about. To me, it's an orchestration of few things, and the first and foremost is culture. The culture of problem solving, the culture of taking risks, the culture of continuous learning to figure out how to improve the world. I think it makes a big difference, and where you do have that culture, you will have entrepreneurship, and you will have successful entrepreneurship. In a country like India, which is tremendously large, as all of you know, it's tremendously diverse. I think we have it pretty much inborn in us. It's in our DNA. We are always trying to figure out how to improve the situation. What do we have to do differently? How do we reduce time to get to a place? How do we? So I think that sort of builds that mindset, builds that culture of thinking out of the box, which I really think is the starting point and the most important ingredient. The second one is, do you have access to good problems? I think entrepreneurship, half the battle is won when you have good problems. In India, that's a huge advantage that we have. And I do call it an advantage because given the diversity and the vastness of the country, we have tremendous problems to solve, be it in energy, be it in water. There are lots of problems, and it again forces you to think out of the box. So it's like a breeding ground for entrepreneurs, right?
I completely agree with you. I think that's part of the Israel success story.
Yeah.
Necessity, like Chaim said to me yesterday, necessity is the mother of invention. In Israel's case, because we couldn't trade with regional partners, we had to create a borderless export, which was technology and know-how. And it's very interesting because you find so many times people with solutions looking for problems, but in countries such as ours, there's so many problems. We don't have that problem. David, Nairobi, 15 years. You're now the regional representative, the regional director in Africa. How do you see the ecosystems growing? Which ones have been particularly successful, and what has made them successful?
Oh, thank you very much. It's an honor for me to be here and to participate, and especially coming from Africa. And the subject for our discussion this afternoon is the next Google going to come from Mombasa. By the way, for those who do not know, Mombasa is in my country. It's a port city of Kenya, which is on the eastern seaboard of Africa. To add my words to the question, what's the secret sauce to innovations? I think I could approach it from a slightly academic point of view. I think this has been researched quite fairly exhaustively, and it comes down to about 4 things. The first one is certainly necessity. Necessity, and if you want to talk about necessity, I think Africa is a capital of necessity and need. So certainly is an honor for me coming from Africa to be here to talk about this. But again, also, when you look at very successful ecosystems, and there have not been that many of them, I think it's also important to think about the enabling environment. And one of the things that has happened in this space is that you really need to have institutions of research, very high quality institutions of research, universities, technical institutions, that and not just institutions. I think a deliberate academic system, right from kindergarten all the way through high school, that has deliberately oriented the human capital towards that preparation for intense research and curiosity, and intellectual curiosity. But also, coming along with that is a grant system where governments deliberately have to create or find resources that will be committed to ventures, especially early startups, which are not viable for private sector investments, seed investors, angel investors, or venture capital. Just to be able to start up, and because it's very, very, very highly risky, majority of them die, at inception, and there has got to be someone who has not just the appetite, but the ability to be able to take on that risk, and it is turned out to largely to be public sector funded grant systems. Finally is a rigorous patent system, patenting, where the creators and the innovators know clearly that they can apply themselves, they can give their time and effort to this, because if they realize or result in something that is going to be meaningful, they will be protected by laws that will ascribe them to them, and they will be able to benefit perhaps generations of their own families thereafter. So I think a combination of those three things is what essentially has resulted in successful ecosystems, startup ecosystems.
Thank you so much, David. And we've seen that I completely agree with you about the importance of research in academia. And I think that's one of the reasons why Jerusalem has succeeded, because we have very strong academic institutions in the city. We have the Hebrew University, which is ranked the top university in Israel. We have engineering colleges, we have design schools, and that's been one of the key ingredients to the success of Jerusalem as a rising ecosystem. And here the challenge has always been, how do we develop the models of collaboration with the universities? And even that we're trying to crack. What about you? Tell us a little bit from your perspective on the Americas.
Yes, exactly.
How you have a completely different region. Where do you see the successful ecosystems, and why?
Right. So I was born in Korea, but I grew up in Argentina, so my heart is in Latin America. We at the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, entered the venture capital industry back in 1996 when VC was practically inexistent in the region. Since then, we have invested in 80 VC funds, seed and VC funds in the region, with investments of more than 300 million, and currently we have a portfolio of around 50 funds. So after all these investments, failures, some successes, what we learned is that there is for decades, governments from Latin America tried to emulate, replicate the Silicon Valley model. And of course, that didn't work. You cannot replicate that at 100% in a completely different region. So what we learned is that in Latin America, it's emerging a new innovation ecosystem, which is the sum of three key ingredients: entrepreneurial spirit of our millennial entrepreneurs, technology, and then frustration. And by frustration, I mean frustration of these millennial entrepreneurs that, in addition to making profits with their companies, they cannot stand that so many people in the region don't have access to financial services, to health services, education, quality education, and so many other things. So those three ingredients are key for the development of the ecosystem in our region.
So basically what you're saying, which is a little bit of what David said, it's the necessity, but it's the frustration of the entrepreneurs to see that the necessity has not been dealt with. What's going on doesn't have a response from the government.
Exactly.
Thank
Correct.
you. Chaim, let's go back to Africa.
Thank you very much for...
How do you work in a specific field, so
Yes.
you work in sustainable energy. Tell us a little bit about how you've seen different ecosystems develop in the countries that you're working in.
Okay, so first of all, just I guess a couple of general points, and then I'll go to specific. It seems like there's a lot of, despite the diversity of the regions, a lot of the same themes, I think, keep on coming up: necessity, need. And in terms of one of the biggest examples of necessity leading to innovation in Africa that people talk about is M-Pesa in Kenya. mobile money. But there's a couple of things I think that are interesting. It's not just the need, it's also the lack of legacy systems. Within 2 years of mobile phone penetration, I think about 17 million people had mobile phones in Kenya. And before that, 225,000 people had landlines. So I don't even know the exponentiality of this, but it's tremendous. With regards to mobile money, there was also there was no legacy system, but people actually used to send money to their families. This wasn't a new idea. People had tried this in other countries, and it didn't really work very much. In Kenya, there are a lot of different factors. One of the factors actually was the civil unrest, where people in the past used to hand money over to people, send it over through somebody on a bus, and go give it to the villagers at home. And during the unrest, the M-Pesa, which existed, Safaricom, which was a trusted operator, people started using it a lot more, and there was tremendous growth. There's a lot of different factors there, but the fact that there was no legacy system, I think, was key. And that's what I'm seeing in other areas as well. And actually, I'll add one more point to that. There's also an issue of legislation and what the government's role is, and I think there's a fine line and there's a kind of balance between not legislating too much, because if you legislate too much for things that are innovative with regards to financial systems, there was big debates in many countries about how to look at the financial innovation when you have everything in an electronic wallet. And there were regulators that were more worried and regulators that were letting the market go. And there's some kind of fine balance to allow the innovation to flourish. At the same time, having a strong body that allows investment and that gives you structure is also very important. And a great example for me is, in my experience, is the Rwanda Development Board, which a country where I've done a lot of work. They have a very strong centralized body where investors come in and they know what they're getting, they know the taxes, they understand a lot of the body, so there's much less uncertainty, and that also allows things to flourish. But I think the key thing I'm seeing is the areas where there's a lack of a system that, or there's lack of a legacy system, and there's great need, and that incorporates the points of financial innovation, education, and in my sphere, energy, and happy to talk about these things in greater length at a later point in this panel.
Great. I want to ask specific questions to specific people from the regions. And I always think it's important to open it up to the audience, which I want to have time for at the end. Jack, you're making it your life's mission to bring in diversity into investment. There's a lot of research being done, how diversity actually makes any innovation ecosystem richer. It's actually one of the secret sources. Could you elaborate a little bit about that? Because some people feel it's just sort of lip service. Yes, yes, we need diversity, when they're very happy in their very niche groups making a lot of money. How do you then go and tell them that this will actually make their businesses better?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is absolutely my life's mission to enable and empower people who come from backgrounds that are outside the norm and give them access to entrepreneurship, because it is this incredible tool for social mobility. And people can go from nothing to actually impacting billions of people. So we have done a lot of work. We're actually a non-profit, but I also am a venture capitalist as well. But Diversity VC is a non-profit. We collect and publish original data about the status of diversity and inclusion in tech and VC. So just one stat, I won't go on about them, but 89p in every pound invested in the UK last year went to all male founding teams, 10p went to mixed gender teams, and 1p went to all female teams. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when you look at across all different aspects of diversity in terms of LGBT, in terms of ethnic minorities, in terms of people with disabilities. So it's a major, major, major issue. And I think it's meaning that we're missing out on trillions of dollars worth of value. And that for me is just so frustrating. I mean, this question's about, can the next Google be built from Mombasa? But I also want to ask, can the next Google be built from someone who grew up, in a council house in the UK, who didn't have access to university, who didn't have all the tools and resources kind of, or anywhere in the world. And at the moment, 50% of venture capital is invested in the US. Of the venture capital invested in the US, 90% is invested in 5 cities. So we are just ignoring kind of 99% of the world at the moment. And what that means is it's unlike, you look at any different industry which is about talent. You look at football, you look at music. Talent is everywhere. And you have scouts searching in villages all over the world for the best future kind of football talent. Why don't we do that with our tech investment ideas? So to come on to the second part of your question, why are we looking for these ideas? Well, it's been shown in numerous studies that businesses which have more diversity in them are more productive, they're more profitable, they're actually lower risk in terms of they're less likely to go wrong, but also they're more creative. So there was a study in Spain that showed that diverse teams are more likely to have a disruptive innovation in 2 years after they become more diverse than ones that didn't. So if we are, as VCs and as investors, all about creating the kind of moonshots and the really exciting, crazy ideas that we couldn't actually ever think of, then diversity is absolutely essential to that.
I love that metaphor about scouting. It's so true. Scouting for best sportsmen, and yet we're ignoring so much of the world and the different sectors. Like, you and I are from the same region. You're in Turkey. Do you see any type of regional narrative story that we could develop here together?
I want to follow up on previous question of it. When you look at the ecosystems and why the ecosystem is so important, because it brings all those like talent, culture, and the most critical thing is money. Like the ecosystems build where the money is. So, but if you look at Europe or Middle East, you see that the founders are coming from everywhere. So it's not the shortage, but the money is becoming more a hub. And even though London is one of the biggest VC market in the world, like most of the success stories came from Eastern Europe or Nordics. So I think it's changing. It's not a problem that much anymore. So, and also they need to scale. If we want to see more success stories, they come to those hubs and scale from there because they need more people, more talent, more money. So that's how I look at the ecosystems. When it comes to being a Middle Eastern or a European, I feel like both. Or I feel like a global citizen. As a woman VC, actually in the world, I think after construction, being a woman GP partner is you don't find women in the space. But I feel like lucky because I'm born and raised in an ecosystem which was just building. So I didn't feel like I was woman or not. It was like I had the challenge of being a VC in ecosystems like Turkey, Eastern Europe, or Middle East. Because you didn't have any success stories before. When I first started, I was like the first VC firm. I was working in the first VC firm in Turkey, and I didn't know how to be a VC. So I had to go to Silicon Valley, London, learn, touch people, build that global relationship, come back and show people it can happen. And even now, the biggest help that I do for my companies, I think, I bring them people who have done it before, and psychologically, they think they can do it now. So I think it's our story here. We have to help them a lot. That's our job. And why technology? It's the biggest job creator in the world now. So it's how we can pull up our people and help them. I think that's my purpose in life. I mean, I love my job. I want to be successful. I want to make a lot of money out of it. But my real purpose is like help those people to make a big change in the world. So I think as venture capitalists or investors, that's really critical.
I think what's fascinating about our panelists is that each one of them are not just successful, but they are developing the models to encourage others, to bring success into others, the women here who are mentors to other women, which is a big part of the puzzle. DEBJANI, tell me a little bit, you were in charge of the Intel Digital Nation project. Oh, maybe although my husband says I don't need a microphone. You were in charge of the Intel project in India. Intel is a big player, for example, in Jerusalem. Can you tell us a little bit about the contribution of a specific giant into the work that you're doing? And obviously, if you want to add anything else to what the ladies have said, then be happy to hear your thoughts.
Well, I was heading Intel in South Asia, and Digital India was one of the projects that we were working on. So when I came back to India in around 2013 as Intel, at that point, one of the biggest challenges was the technology adoption in India was restricted to urban cities. And that's roughly 30% of India. So the next billion, which is the most interesting piece, was totally not touched. And this was around 2012, 2013. So one of the big challenges as a company was how do we take technology to the next billion? Because from a company perspective, it's the right thing to do. It increases market, it increases adoption, so it's a win-win. And the one thing in India that you realize very soon is the power of the ecosystem. As one company, you can do very little. But if you bring in the entire ecosystem to play, so the first thing we did was talk to government, and within a day, in fact, exactly within a day, the government came back and said, let's do this. Then bringing in other partners. So it wasn't just Intel. We had Google, we had Microsoft, we had Lenovo, we had all sorts of companies there. We had the Indian companies. Everybody joined hands. We had academia. So we set up this national digital literacy mission because the big challenge was how do you, it's useless to go to a village and talk to a farmer about technology. But if you can show him how using something is going to improve his livelihood by 10 rupees, 100 rupees, you've got him. Then he starts using it, right? So you have to talk about benefits in a way that is relevant. So digital literacy mission was really about that. Taking technology to the grassroots in a way and connecting, building the connects between technology and livelihood. That was the mission. So we started that mission as an industry with the government. It was tremendously successful. And I think working on that project just made me realize how much more there is to do. And that was one of the key reasons for my switch from private to NASSCOM, because as a platform, NASSCOM offers you this opportunity to really make a difference at a level that no corporate can, right? So, yeah, but it is about the ecosystem. The company can have an idea, a company can have the hunger to do something different, but unless you involve the ecosystem in India, it's very difficult to get things done.
I think any plant needs the fertile ground, and the
Yeah,
ecosystem
absolutely.
is that ground.
Yeah.
CHOE, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of say, and this is kind of relevant to the mission that we're on, but I don't see that happening enough cross-border. I think often it happens kind of within our own countries, and we get really excited about, our own little nations, and even within our own kind of smaller regions within countries or cities. And I just love it if, as you said, you're a global citizen. That's how I feel. I think that's how a lot of people of this generation feel, and millennials and Gen Z. They don't see borders, and I think we've got to be much broader and think much bigger than the border of just our own kind of countries.
Don't forget, India is 20 countries put in 1.3 billion. So if we can solve half of our problems, we've impacted more than half the world. So.
Thank you. David, working in Africa now as the director for Our Crowd, where do you see the opportunities for a platform such as Our Crowd? In which countries do you see people coming on board in investing in Israeli companies?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I think. Can you hear me? Yeah. Good. The opportunity for Our Crowd, which is basically the proxy for the startup ecosystem, the Israeli startup nation in Africa, is large. It's large not only from an investment perspective, but also from a technology transfer perspective. We think that Israel has cracked the code for finding solutions to everyday problems, which are relevant across the world and certainly also into Africa. We in Africa have, like everyone else in their formative years, have developed traditional investment asset classes. We have a few stock exchanges. My country happens to be one of the leading in Africa to have a stock exchange. And certainly what is now happening right now in Africa is the excitement about creating stock exchanges. So most other African countries are only arriving or waking up to the concept of stock exchanges. And then we also have, as another fairly established asset class, property or real estate. Other than that, that's it. Private equity has only just begun about 5 or 10 years ago, and it is the jury is still out whether it is going to gain good traction. It's mixed, and also, of course, certainly only in a few select African countries where we have seen beginning to fall in place the ramparts or the building blocks of private equity in Kenya, in South Africa, in Nigeria. So other than that, there is nothing else. There is, of course, tiny little micro venture capital ecosystems, and Kenya does have one of those, and we can talk about it. But in terms of the opportunity to invest in offshore, VC products that have markedly proven themselves, I think it's vast, I think it's massive. I think it exists in Africa, and I think Africa investors are beginning to open up and are beginning to realize the value and the tolerance for investing in established ecosystems. Why? Because first and foremost, Silicon Valley through now has become the idiom of venture capital through Google's and Facebook and Netflix and Uber have indeed taken the products and the end result of venture capital developed or backed technological concepts and ideas in the shortest time possible to global household consumer names. And we all interact every day. When you wake up and turn on your cell phone, you have a whole
I guess that's
menu.
that's the countries we're living under, right? We're living under Google, we're living under
Exactly,
Netflix.
exactly.
We're talking about global citizenry.
Exactly. So I think yes, and this is a challenge that we have grabbed as our crowd. I now represent our crowd in Africa, starting with Kenya, and we saw that opportunity. And it's early days, which is going to be about a year. But so far, we are beginning to get confirmation that there indeed exists a market to bring global or offshore venture capital investment opportunities.
We wish you a lot of luck, David, and hopefully next year you can come back and tell us how it's going.
Certainly, we will have much more stories to give.
Yung, the question of this panel is if the next Google would be Mombasa. If the next Google would be somewhere in South America, where would you put your money on
Yes,
it?
I would.
Literally, you're putting your money on it.
Yes, I would. Yeah.
So tell me
that
where.
can happen. Again, 10 years or 15 years ago, we used to see a lot of copycats. You know, the Uber from Brazil, the eBay from Argentina, etc. Yeah. Now we still see those companies, but a lot less. And we are seeing a lot of really innovative companies in the region. For instance, we have an investment in Satellogic. Satellogic is a startup from Argentina. They are building a constellation of 90 nanosatellites that are capable of providing very high resolution images for use in agriculture, in mining, and many different industries. That's very innovative for us. A few days ago, Bezos Expedition, I think that's the Jeff Bezos venture fund, he announced an investment of $30 million in a Chilean startup, a food tech Chilean startup that produces food from non-animal products. That was a huge news. And we also have, for instance, a fintech in Brazil, a neobank, that in only 4 years, they issued 4 million credit cards, and they opened almost 2 million digital bank accounts. So, there are so many exciting things happening in the region, so many innovations that we really are excited, and yeah, I wish we had more money
And you think...
to invest in more.
There you go, everybody. They're looking for more money. Just one small follow-up question. So you're saying that's moved from copycat to more real innovation.
Yes.
What changed? Something changed? Did necessity kick in? Was there more of an ecosystem being developed? Millennials talking differently, getting different. Where was the switch? When?
Yes, it's a combination of so many things, right? So we have now, in many countries in the region, for instance, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Chile, they evolved a lot as ecosystems. And that's a combination of, governments giving support, new entrepreneur laws, tax incentives, et cetera, et cetera. We see, the emergence of VC funds, company builders, accelerators. We are seeing a lot of, global players investing for the first time in Latin American companies, such as SoftBank, Tencent, Andreessen Horowitz, and many, many others. And then we are seeing a second generation of entrepreneurs. The first generation learned, failed, some, did very well. But then we have the second generation of entrepreneurs, much more educated, with much more experience and ready to really innovate.
That's really very encouraging. So Chaim, you're specifically in one type of field, clean tech, sustainable energy. How much do you think that type of necessity, the energy necessity, is dictating where these new ecosystems are popping up from?
Sure. So I give a couple of examples on that. My first project that I developed in Africa was in Rwanda. Small project relatively, but for the country, massive impact. It was 6%. It increased the generation capacity of the country by 6%. And it was only a $24 million project, so it wasn't large by many other countries' standards. But for Rwanda, it really increased the generation by a lot. And one of the key factors that helped us move quickly was, A, they really needed it. So they gave us deadlines that nobody had ever done before. And people said it's impossible to close a deal in that speed. From the time I gave the mandate to the lenders, the DFIs, development finance institutions, till financial close was less than 3 months. From the time we started negotiating till we interconnected was 1.5 years. And the reason why they pushed us is because they needed it. The reason why we were able to do it is because they forced us to, and we had to do that.
Well, tell an Israeli something's impossible, and they want to do it.
that actually is a driver for me in general. It's true. I'm not interested in doing the 10th project somewhere where it's been done. It's more interesting to do in the first of its kind. But I think in terms of right now, we talked about the need and the lack of existing systems, which I mentioned with the first example. I think that definitely applies in energy as well. You have 70% of the people not connected to the grid. You have innovations in technology, which allows for mobile payments. You have a need for more people to get on the grid, and you have new systems that are being adapted right now. There's home systems, there's microgrid systems. A lot of these are not yet proven. The microgrids, it's not clear what the exact, that people are making money right now. Without subsidy, it's not yet profitable, I don't believe. But I think it's going to be, people are going to figure it out because they need to. And I say they, I say we, because I'm part of that. And we're trying to figure that out because there's a necessity. And I think that necessity will lead to people figuring out how the grid will be connected to how people will have access, not necessarily to the grid, because you don't have that legacy system which you have in many other countries, but how people are going to get the needs that they have in generation in a better way, hopefully. And that also will probably apply to water as well. It's energy, it's water, it's both. And I think very innovative things are happening. I don't think nobody's really figured out yet. So there's still opportunity for anyone who's an entrepreneur here. But I think that's where things are heading. And maybe I'll combine that with just one other example is with education as well. Africa's average age, anybody know what the average age in Africa is? What's that? 12?
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty young. But
there's a lot of old people as well.
What's the average age in Europe?
40?
About a little over 40. The average age in Japan is 47. The average age in Africa is 19. So there's a lot of need for education. And there's a tremendous need for innovation in education. And I think with new technological things, there's going to be ways that people are educated which do not exist yet. which there are different models that are being created. And I think over the next few years, we'll see a lot of innovation coming from there that hopefully will apply to many other countries around the world and many other continents. And just one last point about Africa, as we talk about Africa, but it's 54 countries. It's always important to say that.
Absolutely. It's really wonderful to see what unites us, rather than focusing on what divides us, which is what I always feel, which is what we constantly are hearing. And like we've all said, there's a number of ingredients with the local adaptations, with the local different characters. I want to take the last few minutes and open this up to the audience. Does anybody have any question for any of our fascinating, wonderful panelists? Now's the time. Anybody? No? You want me to ask all the questions, really? Do you all want to move in with me and replace my children? Okay. So what I want to ask you, just in really 30 seconds, final thoughts.
Yeah, so one of the things I wanted to mention is the barriers to entrepreneurship as well, because we sort of talked about some of the opportunities, but some of the barriers, obviously capital is one of them. The UK has a great tax incentive scheme to get people to invest in early stage startups. So you get income tax relief if you invest in early stage startups. But also one of the barriers to innovation is people not necessarily finding co-founders, finding teams, finding ideas. And there's an organization called Entrepreneur First, which is in the UK, and actually we've got a founder here who's on the program at the moment, but it's also in Berlin, it's in Singapore, it's in Bangalore as well, and it's gone global from the UK, and the investors are the US, but they help entrepreneurs find co-founders and find ideas, and they're often deep tech entrepreneurs. And I think it's an incredible example of ecosystem building, because you've just brought in these people who felt that they couldn't ever be entrepreneurs. And some of the success stories, one of the companies sold to Twitter for 150 million. So it's a really cool concept, which I encourage people to investigate if they haven't.
If we look at the market, like investment markets or startup markets now, like in US, the last year VC investment was $115 billion, followed by China, which is around 90 billion. Here, I think it was 2-point-something billion. And if you look at the exit values of those ecosystems, like still Silicon Valley is the winner with 35% of whole exits, and followed by Beijing and London. But now I think we are in an inflection point. It wasn't possible before, but now people can create technology anywhere and sell it to anywhere. Actually, my partner, at town, it's not in Istanbul, by the way, it's like in Ankara, he sold more than 3,000 customers all around the world, and Atlassian bought them for a huge premium. So now I see it's happening. So talent is global, and they are going to try to access anything around the world, and those exit values are going to change. So as VCs or ecosystem players, we should tap into those opportunities all around the world, and we should think globally.
Thank you so much. That's so encouraging. Some last thoughts.
Yeah, to me, I don't think it's about the next Google that we should be worrying about, because I think the next big game-changing company is going to come from what Kim said. It's either going to be in energy, healthcare, agri-tech. It's going to be one of these fields, because the biggest problems facing the world today is food shortage, climate change, water shortage. So this is where, and if you look at the success of Google and Amazon or any other big company out there, it was the problem that they identified, the problem that they identified and went after, right? And the next big problems are in these areas. So I think the next big game-changing global companies we hopefully are going to see are going to be in these areas. And given that these problems are much deeper in Asia, in Africa, I will absolutely not be surprised if we do see the next big giants from one of these regions. But I also believe that in today's world, it's going to be a company that is co-creating solutions, an Indian company with an Israeli company, or it's going to be about co-creation. It's going to be about co-development, and it's definitely going to be in one of these areas.
Okay, we've got 40 seconds left for the three of you. I'm so sorry.
Okay, I'll take my 20. I just want to go back to the question, and I'd like to submit that I believe firmly that the next Google, and I think Google really here is just an adverb. It just represents the next globally successful technological innovation is going to come from Mombasa. Why? Because Haim put it nicely, Africa has the fastest population growth. Right now we have about 1 billion people in Africa. Out of the 7 billion people of us, 1 billion come from Africa. And we're going to add another 1 billion in the next 35 years only. So in 35 years from today, we're going to be 2 billion people, by which time the population of North America will have declined. The population of Europe will have declined. The population of Asia will have declined. Indeed, it is prognosticated that even the population growth in China is going to start declining in the next, I think, 6 to 7 years. So what is going to happen is that Africa will begin to supply or to provide some of the next largest population centers. Right now, there are only two African countries in the top 10% most populous nations in the world. In 35 years, will be 5 African countries. So in terms of market, Africa will be the market. The second thing is that rate of urbanization as well, closing in very, 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 very closely to Asia, which is largely India.